Hey guys! Tonight we're venturing into the dim passages of authority, where royal crowns throw extended shadows and quiet murmurs hold greater significance than loud declarations. You're strolling along ornate corridors where history's most impactful women glided like spirits. Their effects spread across empires, even as they stayed formally unseen. Tonight, you'll uncover the Queen's consort who governed from concealed positions behind luxurious drapes, their identities frequently overlooked as their spouses took the credit. You sense the burden of ages bearing down while recognizing that these figures molded the world you live in now. Their choices ignited conflicts, concluded royal lines, and altered humanity's path. This narrative might unravel enigmas you've never resolved, the reasons behind specific wars, the ascent and decline of great powers, the current configuration of Europe's borders. So before we dive into this tale together, please pause to support the channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing this video, or perhaps dropping a comment below, but only if you truly enjoy the content I provide. You're welcome to mention where and when you began viewing this, or what attracts you to these concealed tales of dominance. Your interaction assists in reviving the voices of these overlooked queens. Now, let's dim the lights to their softest glow. Activate the fan for a soothing hum to enhance the tale's emotional depth, and let's set off on this evening's adventure as one. You're positioned in a medieval fortress where flames from candles dance on stone surfaces, and you spot something unusual. The king occupies his throne, his golden crown shining brightly, yet your gaze shifts to the lady next to him. Her headpiece is more modest, her seat placed just slightly to the rear. However, as supplicants draw near, you notice their glances flick to her expression, seeking the faint approval or disapproval that will seal their destiny. This realm belongs to the queen consort, a place of formal helplessness but informal supremacy. You see her incline forward, her silk dress whispering softly to murmur a word into the king's ear. Whatever she conveys makes him sit taller, his ruling abruptly resolute. The supplicant's outcome has been decided by phrases no historian will document. Across eras, the position of queen consort embodied a captivating paradox. Formally, these ladies were supposed to be ornamental, productive in airs and voiceless. Their roles involved bearing successors and appearing elegant during royal events. Yet, you learn that the most adept queen's consort grasped that genuine authority frequently traveled via informal paths. As their partners led forces and endorsed pacts, these women directed a more nuanced and frequently more potent element: sway. You watch them construct webs of allegiance that extended over lands. Via thoughtfully selected attendants, purposeful letters, and the timeless practice of welcoming guests, they forged unseen dominions. A queen consort may never command soldiers in combat, but she could guarantee those warriors were nourished, financed, and battling for the proper objective. She might never endorse a treaty, but she could orchestrate the unions that rendered such agreements essential. The medieval notion of queenship was profoundly linked to the holy. You experience the solemnity of sacred rites during a queen's anointing. She's not merely turning into a state figure, she's evolving into a nearly divine entity, the chosen conduit of the divine for generating the forthcoming rulers. This sacred prestige granted queens consort a distinctive form of dominance. They served as the sanctified matriarchs of realms, and opposing them equated to defying the heavenly structure. but you also perceive the unstable essence of their standing. A queen consort's authority was perpetually loaned, always reliant on her bond with the king. Lose his approval, neglect to bear male heirs, or merely age and diminish in allure, and she might be cast aside, separated, or face graver fates. Some encountered charges of infidelity, sorcery, or betrayal once they grew inconvenient. The closeness that afforded them leverage also rendered them exposed. The financial aspects of queenship were intricate and frequently concealed. You glance past the formal logs to find that numerous queens consort managed extensive assets. Their marriage portions, inherited properties, and private holdings provided autonomous riches that could be utilized tactically. Some emerged as sponsors of creative pursuits and scholarship, forging cultural heritages that endured beyond their spouses' battlefield triumphs. Others directed their funds toward spiritual establishments, establishing chains of appreciation and duty that advanced their state objectives. You detect the refined instruments these women employed with expert accuracy. Attire turned into a language of statecraft. The selection of gems to adorn, hues to prefer, and overseas fashions to embrace could convey signals across domains quicker than any courier. A queen's staff selections were never haphazard. Each companion, each spiritual guide, each performer was picked for their ties and devotions. Via these meticulously assembled groups, knowledge circulated and benefits were traded. The craft of composing missives became their chief instrument. You peer across their shoulders as they pen letters that seem to address domestic concerns, but in reality organize state coalitions. Their intimate bonds with offspring wed into distant courts, with siblings acting as abbesses, with relatives occupying key roles, formed state channels that functioned alongside formal national dialogues. Scholars continue to debate if these women held authentic might or were simply pieces in a system ruled by men. Certain academics regard them as proto-feminists, astutely operating inside confining frameworks to fulfill their aims. Others perceive them as accomplices who aided in upholding male-dominated hierarchies by rendering them seem kinder. The reality, you come to see, probably resides midway between these poles, differing greatly depending on personal situations and societal settings. You detect how various societies handled the queen consort's role in intriguing manners. In China, the emperor's dowager could emerge as the actual sovereign of the realm. Her command stemmed from her status as the emperor's mother. In the Ottoman Empire, the Queen Mother or Valid Sultan exercised immense authority inside the palace arrangement. European queens consort frequently directed their sway via spiritual sponsorship and state marriage setups. The private chamber oddly became both their utmost fragility and their strongest foundation of strength. You grasp that in a period where lineage established validity, the queen's ability to bear children was essentially the bedrock of royal command. Yet this identical closeness to the king afforded them unmatched entry to his ideas, anxieties, and judgment processes. Evening dialogues between partners formed strategies impacting multitudes. Spiritual commitment offered another pathway for sway that was both culturally permissible and state-wise potent. You see queens consort establishing monasteries, funding holy groups, and supporting sacred individuals. These endeavors granted them ethical command while forging webs of devoted backers across the domain. A queen's spiritual advisor frequently held greater actual sway than numerous court functionaries, acting as her counselor and occasionally her informant. The occurrence of regent queens exposes the supreme irony of their status. When kings perished, leaving underage successors, the identical culture that typically withheld political command from women would abruptly assign whole realms to their oversight. You behold these extraordinary shifts as ornamental consorts abruptly turned into supreme leaders, frequently exhibiting state acumen that eclipsed their late spouses. As you ready yourself to probe further into these obscured chronicles, you hear the murmurs of women whose identities have been eclipsed by their more renowned partners. Their tales are inscribed amid the lines of formal annals, concealed in intimate letters, and safeguarded in the thankful recollections of those they assisted. Tonight, you'll tread in their paths and uncover how history's most potent queens were frequently those who never formally governed whatsoever. The crown they bore might have been smaller, but the realms they affected were immense beyond calculation. You discover yourself conveyed to the sunlit courts of 12th century Europe, where one woman's aspirations extended over two realms and reconfigured the state landscape of medieval Europe. Eleanor of Aquitaine navigates these spaces with the assurance of one who knows she holds something more precious than wealth, lineage, allure, and a mind keen enough to outwit monarchs. At 15, you see Eleanor inherit the extensive duchy of Aquitaine, rendering her Europe's most desirable heiress. Her territories span from the Loire Valley to the Pyrenees, including areas vaster than the Kingdom of France itself. You can nearly savor the wine from her vineyards, inhale the briny breeze from her Atlantic harbors, and listen to the troubadours whose songs of courtly love she supports. This isn't merely an inheritance, it's a foundation of strength that will enable her to engage in medieval politics' grand contest on par with any sovereign. You behold her initial tactical union to Louis VII of France in 1137, a bond that ought to have formed Europe's mightiest kingdom. But this is where Eleanor illustrates the intricacy of queenly authority. At times, the very attribute that renders you essential also makes you perilous. Her lively character conflicts with Louis's devout, nearly monastic disposition. While he prays, she pursues hunts. While he abstains, she indulges. While he ponders eternity, she's occupied with influencing the present. The Second Crusade turns into Eleanor's platform for showcasing her non-traditional approach to queenly responsibilities. You advance beside her as she commands her own group of Aquitanian knights toward the Holy Land, shocking Europe by donning armor and joining war councils. Rumors circulate about her. Some murmur of a liaison with her uncle Raymond of Antioch. Others imply she's scheming to seize Jerusalem for herself. The reality, as you uncover, is more subtle, more politically shrewd than the rumor mongers envision. Eleanor comprehended something many peers overlooked. Knowledge is strength, and journeys are instruction. Throughout the crusade, she forges ties with Byzantine aristocrats, absorbs Arabic traditions, and learns about commerce paths that will advantage her lands for years. While fellow crusaders perceive only sacred obligation, Eleanor spots chances to broaden her sphere of sway across the Mediterranean. The annulment of her marriage to Louis VII in 1152 stands as one of medieval history's boldest state maneuvers. You see Eleanor manipulate church law, asserting consanguinity, excessively close kinship to dissolve a union that yielded 2 daughters but no son. Mere weeks after reclaiming her liberty and territories, she's already plotting her subsequent step with a chess master's deliberate accuracy. Her wedding to Henry Plantagenet, who would ascend as Henry II of England, forges an empire spanning from Scotland to the Pyrenees. You feel the charged atmosphere as two of medieval Europe's most vibrant figures unite. This isn't solely passion, it's a consolidation that will control European politics for eras. Jointly, they govern more land than France's king, generating a power disparity that will spark disputes for centuries. But Eleanor's genuine brilliance unveils itself how she oversees this legacy while nurturing a family of future rulers and queens. You glance into her secluded rooms where she's concurrently tending the infant who will become Richard the Lionheart, issuing directives to her Aquitaine overseers and arranging marital coalitions that will install her offspring on thrones throughout Europe. Her daughter Marie ascends as Countess of Champagne, founding a court that will emerge as the hub of courtly love writings. Her daughter Eleanor becomes Queen of Castile. Her sons will contend for crowns from England to Jerusalem. The uprising of 1173 displays Eleanor at her most statewise merciless. You see her coordinate a synchronized revolt against her spouse, aligning with her sons and France's king to contest Henry's rule. This isn't simple household conflict. It's a refined effort to reallocate authority inside the Plantagenet domain. Eleanor grasps that Henry's unified control endangers the customary independence of her Aquitanian holdings, and she's ready to hazard all to safeguard her ancestral privileges. Her apprehension and ensuing confinement by Henry disclose both the boundaries and persistence of her authority. For 16 years, you view Eleanor restricted to assorted fortresses, formally impotent, yet still upholding communications with allies across her territories. Even imprisoned, she persists as a state force. Henry refrains from injuring her since she's too precious as a captive and too hazardous as a saint. Scholars still contend if Eleanor's insurrections stemmed from individual drive, motherly loyalty to her sons, or authentic state principle concerning feudal entitlements. The proof indicates all three elements intertwined in intricate manners, forming a state philosophy that was both practical and visionary. The instant of Eleanor's supreme victory comes with Henry's passing in 1189. At 67, an era when most medieval ladies were deemed beyond utility, she arises from captivity to serve as regent for her distant son Richard. You behold in wonder as she journeys across the Plantagenet realms from England to Aquitaine, gaining fidelity and structuring the oversight of a massive empire. Her vitality appears boundless, her state instincts keener than before. Her expedition to Sicily to accompany Richard's fiancée, Berengaria of Navarre, to the Holy Land illustrates Eleanor's grasp of medieval queenship's global aspects. This isn't merely a grandmother aiding nuptial plans, it's critical diplomacy that will decide coalitions across the Mediterranean. You voyage with her amid tempests and state schemes, observing as she secures safe transit, handles arrangements for a royal ceremony in an alien territory, and guarantees the steadiness of kingdoms far from home. When Richard is seized returning from the Third Crusade, Eleanor's reaction discloses the complete scope of her lingering sway. You see her rallying assets across two realms to collect his ransom, composing letters that merge maternal urgency with state computation. Her pleas to the Pope, to Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, and to nobles throughout Europe showcase a web of connections constructed over 5 decades of deliberate bond forming. The concluding stage of Eleanor's existence during her youngest son John's rule displays a veteran politician adjusting to altered conditions. Though formally withdrawn to the Abbey of Fontevraud, she persists in intervening during emergencies, emerging to protect Anjou from French assaults when she's almost 80 years old. Her final major state act entails securing the inheritance of her grandson, Arthur of Brittany, showing that even nearing demise, she stays centered on lineage persistence. Eleanor's heritage stretches well past her own extraordinary existence. You follow how her sponsorship of troubadour traditions profoundly altered European writings and societal practices. The idea of courtly love, which she aided in fostering in her courts, introduced concepts about affectionate bonds that still affect Western society today. Her model of female state involvement, though disputed in her era, supplied a pattern for subsequent queens who would assert comparable command. You come to understand that Eleanor of Aquitaine embodies the medieval queen consort at her peak effectiveness, an individual who converted the restrictions of her formal position into chances for unparalleled sway. Her network of state connections, spanning ages and traversing cultural divides, illustrates how a resolute and astute woman could reconfigure the medieval realm via tactical reasoning, meticulous bond oversight, and the bravery to stake everything for authority. You pace through the marble passages of Constantinople, where the aroma of incense blends with schemes, and uncover a realm where a performer from the Hippodrome ascended to become one of history's most commanding empresses. The Byzantine Empire unfolds before you like a gem-embellished fabric, and at its core resides Theodora, whose path from the amusement quarters to the imperial seat marks one of the most striking shifts in political annals. The Constantinople you step into throbs with vitality from numerous diverse cultures. Greek fire illuminates the harbor, silk traders barter in various tongues. And the majestic dome of Hagia Sophia oversees a horizon that links Europe and Asia. This is the Eastern Roman Empire at its pinnacle, where Roman jurisprudence encounters Eastern grandeur and where a woman's cleverness can elevate her higher than aristocratic lineage ever might. You catch sight of Theodora in her initial form, acting in the Hippodrome's dramatic shows that blur the boundary between amusement and outrage. Byzantine theater was infamous for its crude humor and sensual elements, and actresses held a societal rank scarcely above courtesans. Yet, even in these modest settings, you detect something exceptional about this young lady. A brilliance that gleams in her gaze, a charisma that draws focus even amid a troupe of entertainers. The change commences when Theodora captures Justinian's attention, nephew and designated successor to Emperor Justin the Fiender. You see their improbable romance develop against the setting of Byzantine court politics, where upward mobility was theoretically feasible but practically uncommon. Justinian's obsession with an actress outrages the elite, but you perceive that his appeal surpasses simple bodily longing. He identifies in Theodora a state intellect that aligns with his own goals. The legal hurdles to their union expose the strict class divisions of Byzantine society. Ancient Roman statutes expressly banned senators from wedding actresses, and Justinian's future imperial status renders such a bond politically volatile. You behold the cautious maneuvering needed to surmount these obstacles, including alterations to imperial edicts that formally raised Theodora's societal standing. This wasn't merely love triumphing over social norms. It was a deliberate state partnership masked as a romance. Between their initial encounter and their eventual wedding, you note Theodora's deliberate shaping of her public persona. She forsakes the stage life, adopts Christian piety with evident fervor, and starts mingling with the court's honorable ladies. This shift wasn't simple pretense. She was methodically reconstructing her image while mastering the elaborate rules of imperial etiquette. You see her examine court manners with the same zeal she once applied to learning scripts. When Justinian ascends as emperor in 527, you view Theodora elevated to Augusta, a designation that rendered her co-sovereign rather than simple consort. Byzantine empresses customarily exercised considerable sway, but Theodora's authority surpasses even these liberal precedents. Contemporary accounts depict her accepting foreign envoys autonomously, proclaiming her own decrees, and forming policy choices that guide the empire's course. Her seat stands beside Justinian's as an equivalent, not inferior, and courtiers swiftly learn that slighting the empress invites imperial fury. The Nika riots of 532 furnish the pivotal instant of Theodora's rule when you see her state bravery in its most vivid form. Constantinople erupts in turmoil as competing circus groups unite against Justinian's governance, igniting the city and declaring a new ruler. With blazes visible from palace openings and counselors pressing for escape, you see Theodora utter the address that preserves the empire. Purple makes a fine shroud. Her statement that she would prefer death as empress over life as a runaway fortifies Justinian's determination and results in the fierce quelling of the revolt. You uncover that Theodora's sway reached well past ritual duties into the intricate administration of the empire. She upheld her own intelligence system, managed separate diplomatic avenues, and followed policy aims that occasionally clashed with her spouse's inclinations. Religious strategy became a specific domain where her sway appeared, as she shielded Monophysite Christians despite Justinian's endeavors at religious harmony via orthodox teachings. The empress's regard for women's well-being discloses another facet of her state philosophy. You see as she backs laws that enhance women's legal position, prohibits compelled prostitution, and offers financial aid for reformed courtesans. These weren't simply benevolent acts, but organized efforts to tackle societal issues via imperial statutes. Her own history provided her with understandings of women's susceptibilities in Byzantine culture that noble empresses might never have grasped. Her founding of the Metanoia, a home for ex-prostitutes, shows how personal background converted into structural change. You tour this haven where hundreds of women discovered shelter, learning, and prospects for honorable livings. The establishment featured workshops for fabric creation, classes for fundamental reading, and shrines for religious direction. Some detractors murmured that Theodora was simply easing her guilt, but you see the authentic changes in these women's existences. Theodora's court evolves into a hub of scholarly and creative pursuit that competes with the ancient world's finest cultural feats. You stroll through spaces where legal experts assemble the corpus juris civilis, designers blueprint the rebuilding of Hagia Sophia, and chroniclers like Procopius document the empire's accomplishments for future generations. Yet you also detect the underlying strains. Procopius's secret history discloses the dread and bitterness that Theodora's authority evoked among conventional elites. The empress's diplomatic endeavors illustrate her grasp of Byzantine geopolitics intricacy. You see her sustain letters with Ostrogothic Queen Amalasuntha, bargain with Persian delegates, and oversee ties with diverse barbarian leaders along the empire's vast borders. Her gender occasionally turned into a benefit in these talks, as overseas rulers might undervalue her state sharpness while valuing the privilege of corresponding directly with the empress. You note Theodora's command of Byzantine court plots, where she handles rival groups with the expertise of a chess virtuoso. The blue and green circus factions that had allied against Justinian in the Nika riots needed cautious handling afterward. Instead of merely suppressing both sides, Theodora pits them against one another, bestowing favors on one while preserving bonds with the other, guaranteeing neither grows potent enough to endanger imperial command. Again, scholars still debate if Theodora's sway was ultimately advantageous or harmful to the Byzantine Empire. Advocates highlight her part in preserving Justinian's throne amid the Nika riots, her forward-thinking social laws, and her role in the cultural blossoming of the early 6th century. Detractors claim her vengeful temperament, her religious bias, and her meddling in imperial management undermined the empire's rule. You detect how Theodora's history as a performer aided her in the dramatic realm of Byzantine court politics. The abilities she acquired on stage gauging crowds, projecting command, regulating her feelings, translated flawlessly into the imperial role. Byzantine court ritual was itself a type of performance crafted to astonish subjects and foreign guests with exhibits of imperial splendor. The religious disputes of her rule disclose the intricate bond between personal belief and state computation. While formally backing Justinian's attempts to unify Christian doctrine, Theodora covertly sheltered Monophysite clergy and sustained links with theologians who opposed imperial religious strategy. You see her maneuvering between public adherence and private belief, employing her status to temper her spouse's occasionally severe religious strategies. Theodora's impact on building projects reaches beyond simple sponsorship to active engagement in design and erection choices. You see her involvement in planning the reconstructed Hagia Sophia, her founding of churches devoted to saints, especially vital to women, and her establishment of housing complexes that supplied dwellings for reformed prostitutes. These initiatives embodied both personal piety and state declarations about imperial power's role in enhancing subjects' lives. The empress's death in 548 signifies the close of a period in Byzantine politics. You note how Justinian's subsequent years lacked the resolute quality that marked his early governance, implying that Theodora's state judgment had been more essential to their collaboration than contemporary sources admitted. The laws she advocated slowly diminished after her passing, suggesting that her personal sway had been vital to sustain progressive strategies. You come to understand that Theodora embodies the supreme evolution of the queen consort role, an individual who surpassed the conventional barriers of gender and origin to become a genuine collaborator in imperial rule. Her narrative shows how wit, resolve, and political expertise could surmount seemingly unbeatable social obstacles in the appropriate historical settings. From Constantinople's amusement districts to the throne of the Eastern Roman Empire, her path discloses the capacity for personal initiative, even within the confines of ancient societal systems. You find yourself in the scented rooms of the Louvre Palace, where candlelight dances over parchment inscribed with graceful handwriting, and witness Catherine de Medici weaving Europe's political threads through her extensive letter network. The aroma of melted sealing wax permeates the space as you watch one of history's most adept political operators direct nations' fates from behind an elaborate writing table. Catherine's fingers glide with practiced exactness as she composes letters that appear to cover family issues, but truly synchronize military efforts, religious directives, and lineage marriages across the continent. You lean nearer to examine her method, how she embeds significance within apparently harmless expressions, how she modifies her manner for varied recipients, how she succeeds in sounding both nurturing and intimidating, based on her listeners' requirements. The young lady who reached France as a 14-year-old bride carried more than just Medici wealth to her union with the future Henry II. You trace her progression from clumsy overseas princess to expert in French court schemes, watching as she learns to traverse the tangled net of noble clans, religious groups, and regional devotions that defined 16th century France. Her early periods of seeming impotence were actually a rigorous schooling in the art of leverage. You behold Catherine's evolution during her spouse's rule, as she progresses from ornamental consort to vital counselor. While Henry engages in his renowned affair with Diane de Poitiers, Catherine directs her energies toward comprehending government's mechanisms. She participates in council sessions as a spectator, commits to memory the names and connections of every notable noble family, and starts constructing the information web that will aid her for decades. The deadly jousting mishap that slays Henry II in 1559 propels Catherine into the position she was destined for, regent for her underage son, Francis II. You sense the abrupt change in court interactions as nobles who had dismissed her as the Italian trader's offspring suddenly realize she controls access to royal preference. Her composed acceptance of command reveals years of meticulous preparation that few had observed. Catherine's letters during the initial regency illustrate her refined grasp of psychology. You read alongside her as she writes to Philip II of Spain, her words delicately equating respect with subtle warnings. To the Duke of Guise, she provides backing while softly recalling his reliance on royal goodwill. To her kin in Italy, she upholds ties while evading pledges that might harm French concerns. The demise of Francis II after scarcely a year reigning presents Catherine's greatest trial and chance. Her second son, Charles IX, is merely 10 years old, assuring another extended regency. You see Catherine solidify her stance against rival claims for sway, especially from the mighty Guise family and the Protestant nobility headed by the Prince of Condé. Her approach merges public shows of motherly commitment with private bargains that secure essential loyalties. The eruption of the French Wars of Religion converts Catherine from regent to a sort of battlefield leader, though she combats with correspondence rather than blades. You note her efforts to equilibrate Catholic and Protestant groups, at times favoring one, at times the other, always striving to maintain royal command against the elements threatening to fragment France. Her renowned edicts of tolerance embody not religious awakening, but state reckoning. She requires both sides feeble enough to stay reliant on royal arbitration. You uncover that Catherine's intelligence system rivals any contemporary sovereign's. Through her attendants, her healers, and her seers, she collects data from across Europe. Her letters disclose awareness of English court affairs, Spanish armed preparations, and Ottoman state initiatives. This knowledge becomes barter in her dealings, enabling her to proffer valuable insights in trade for political backing. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572 marks Catherine's most disputed and intricate state choice. You see the tormenting computations that led to her endorsement of the organized slaying of Protestant chiefs assembled in Paris for her daughter's nuptials. While scholars debate if she orchestrated the massacre or simply couldn't halt it, her letters disclose a woman frantically attempting to avert civil strife by removing its possible heads. The paradox that the massacre actually heightened religious strife illustrates the boundaries of even the most refined political handling. Catherine's oversight of her children's weddings highlights her grasp of dynasty politics' global scopes. You note her discussions for her daughter Elizabeth's union to Philip II of Spain, balancing French concerns against the necessity for Spanish partnership. Her daughter Margot's wedding to Henry of Navarre, the future Henry IV, signifies an effort to mend religious rifts via matrimonial statecraft. Each ceremony becomes a state assertion meticulously computed for utmost tactical benefit. The celebrated grand tour that Catherine arranges for Charles IX discloses her comprehension of monarchy's dramatic elements. You journey with the royal entourage as it advances through France's regions, watching Catherine direct elaborate rituals designed to exhibit royal splendor while amassing data on local situations. Each halt turns into a chance for casual talks with area chiefs, spiritual authorities, and overseas envoys. Scholars still contend if Catherine's religious strategies embodied true tolerance or cynical manipulation. Her letters indicate a woman more focused on political steadiness than doctrinal accuracy, ready to back either Catholic or Protestant causes when they advanced royal aims. This practical stance on religious matters appalled contemporaries who anticipated rulers to champion heavenly truth over state convenience. You detect how Catherine modifies conventional queenly duties to advance her state goals. Her sponsorship of arts and writings creates a cultural court that rivals Italy's Renaissance hubs, but also functions as a diplomatic instrument for dazzling foreign guests and compensating faithful allies. Her renowned fascination with astrology and esoteric practices, while authentic, also supplies handy disguise for data collection and state planning that might otherwise seem menacing. The regency for her third son, Henry III, illustrates Catherine's progression into a veteran stateswoman whose counsel carries weight even without formal command. You note her ongoing engagement in key choices, her handling of court groups, and her attempts to steer Henry through the growingly complex trials facing the French monarchy. Her sway persists not via official power, but through the bonds and duties cultivated over decades of careful state nurturing. Catherine's letters with overseas rulers disclose her refined grasp of European power equilibrium politics. She upholds ties with Elizabeth IV of England despite their faith differences, corresponds with Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II about French concerns in Germany, and even swaps letters with Ottoman Sultan Murad III about possible collaboration against Spanish might. These exchanges show how a queen mother could function as an autonomous diplomatic entity. The later periods of Catherine's life display her striving to preserve sway as France descends toward the turmoil that will ultimately yield Henry IV's ascension. You see her concluding efforts to arbitrate between rival groups, her endeavors to safeguard Valois dynasty claims, and her increasing irritation with the religious zealotry that renders political settlement increasingly challenging. You come to understand that Catherine de Medici embodies the queen consort's master envoy, an individual who converted the customary restrictions of female command into opportunities for unmatched global sway. Her heritage resides not in armed triumphs or faith reforms, but in the refined state methods she devised for handling complex multi-group disputes through cautious bond building, tactical data gathering, and the patient fostering of duties and dependencies that surpassed formal governmental frameworks. You find yourself gliding through the Forbidden City's quiet passages, where silk brushes against polished floors and the fragrance of jasmine mixes with political plots. Behind ornate screens adorned with golden dragons, you uncover Empress Dowager Cixi, the woman who would govern China for nearly half a century while formally staying invisible. Her delicate hands adjust jade pieces on a game board, but you realize the contest she's engaging spans continents, and the pieces are living people. The young woman who entered the imperial palace as a low-ranking concubine possessed an intelligence that burned like incense in the shadows. You watch 17-year-old Cixi navigate the treacherous politics of Emperor Xianfeng's court, where a single misstep could mean death, and only the most cunning survived. Her beauty caught the emperor's eye, but her wit ensured she remained memorable long after other concubines were forgotten. The birth of her son, Tongji, in 1856, transforms Cixi from disposable ornament to indispensable political player. You feel the shift in palace dynamics as she becomes the mother of the heir apparent, her status suddenly protected by the most sacred obligation in Chinese culture, ensuring dynastic continuity. Yet even in this elevated position, she remains officially powerless, forbidden by Confucian tradition from participating directly in governance. You observe how Cixi turns the restrictions of the Chinese court system into advantages through patient manipulation. The elaborate protocols that keep imperial women separated from male officials become her shield against direct accountability. When controversial decisions emerge from behind the silk screens, critics cannot be certain whether they originated with the Empress Dowager, her co-regent, or the young emperor himself. This ambiguity becomes her greatest weapon. The death of Emperor Xianfeng in 1861 precipitates the crisis that will define Cixi's reign. You witness the tense negotiations over the regency arrangement for 5-year-old Tongji, as powerful court factions maneuver for control. Cixi's alliance with Empress Zhen creates an unexpected coalition that outmaneuvers the male regents appointed by the dying emperor. Their coup, accomplished through forged documents and strategic bribery, demonstrates that female exclusion from official power doesn't necessarily mean exclusion from real power. The establishment of the dual regency reveals Cixi's sophisticated understanding of Chinese political psychology. By sharing official authority with the senior empress, she avoids the appearance of personal ambition while maintaining practical control over day-to-day decisions. You watch as she gradually assumes dominance within this partnership. Her stronger personality and superior political instincts making her the effective ruler, while Empress Zhen provides legitimacy and ceremonial dignity. You discover that Cixi's intelligence network extends throughout the empire like spiderwebs glistening with morning dew. Through eunuchs, palace servants, provincial wives, and merchant connections, information flows to her apartments from across China's vast territories. She knows about rebellions before her generals, understands economic conditions better than her ministers, and maintains awareness of foreign activities that sometimes exceeds her diplomat's knowledge. The Taiping Rebellion's final phase demonstrates Cixi's pragmatic approach to imperial governance. You observe her support for General Zheng Guofan's ruthless suppression of the rebels, recognizing that ideological purity matters less than dynastic survival. Her willingness to employ Han Chinese generals, despite Manchu traditions of ethnic exclusivity, reveals a political flexibility that will characterize her entire reign. The challenge of Western imperialism forces Cixi to confront the fundamental question of China's relationship with modernity. You witness her internal struggles as she balances traditional Confucian values against the obvious need for military and technological modernization. Her support for the self-strengthening movement represents a calculated compromise, adopting Western techniques while preserving Chinese cultural foundations. The mysterious death of Emperor Tongji in 1875 provides another opportunity for Cixi to demonstrate her political mastery. Rather than allowing power to pass to Tongji's infant heir, she maneuvers to place her nephew Guangxu on the throne, ensuring another lengthy regency under her control. You watch as she navigates the complex succession protocols, using her knowledge of imperial genealogy and her network of palace supporters to secure this irregular but legal arrangement. Cixi's retirement during Guangxu's majority proves to be another masterpiece of political theater. You observe how she withdraws from daily governance while maintaining ultimate authority over crucial decisions. Her residence at the Summer Palace becomes an alternative court where the real business of empire continues under the guise of maternal guidance and ceremonial consultation. The Sino-Japanese War of 1894-95 represents perhaps Cixi's greatest political failure, when her confidence in traditional Chinese military superiority collides with modern Japanese efficiency. You witness her shock at China's humiliating defeat, her rage at the terms of the Treaty of Shimonoseki, and her dawning recognition that China's isolation from world affairs has become unsustainable. The war's aftermath forces her to reconsider fundamental assumptions about governance and modernization. Emperor Guangxu's 100 Days Reform in 1898 creates the final showdown between traditional and modern approaches to Chinese governance. You watch as Cixi initially tolerates her nephew's radical reform program before concluding that his changes threaten the stability of imperial authority. Her coup against Guangxu demonstrates that even modernizing reforms must respect traditional power structures to survive in late Qing China. The Boxer Rebellion of 1900 showcases both Cixi's political miscalculation and her remarkable ability to recover from disaster. You witness her initial support for the anti-foreign movement, her flight from Beijing when the intervention forces arrive, and her shrewd negotiation of terms that preserved the dynasty despite military defeat. Her survival of this crisis demonstrates the resilience that kept her in power through 5 decades of continuous upheaval. Historians still argue whether Cixi's resistance to reform ultimately doomed the Qing dynasty or prolonged its survival against impossible odds. Her supporters point to her success in maintaining Chinese independence during the height of Western imperialism, while critics argue that her conservatism prevented the modernization that might have saved imperial China. You notice how Cixi adapts traditional Chinese concepts of maternal authority to justify unprecedented female political power. Her role as sacred mother of the empire provides cultural legitimacy for activities that would otherwise violate Confucian gender norms. This rhetorical strategy allows her to exercise authority while maintaining the appearance of traditional propriety. The Empress Dowager's patronage of arts and architecture reveals another dimension of her political strategy. You tour the reconstructed Summer Palace, observing how its magnificence serves both personal pleasure and political purpose. The palace demonstrates imperial resources to foreign visitors, while providing a setting where Cixi can receive diplomats and conduct negotiations outside the formal constraints of Forbidden City protocol. The final years of Cixi's reign show an elderly woman grappling with forces beyond any individual's control. You observe her belated attempts at constitutional reform, her efforts to modernize the imperial military, and her recognition that China must adapt to survive in the 20th century. Her death in 1908, occurring suspiciously close to Emperor Guangxu's demise, ends an era in Chinese history while leaving fundamental questions about China's future unresolved. You realize that Empress Dowager Cixi represents the ultimate expression of hidden queenly power, someone who ruled one of the world's largest empires for nearly 50 years while maintaining the fiction that women could not participate in governance. Her story demonstrates how cultural restrictions on female authority could be circumvented by those clever enough to work within traditional systems while gradually reshaping them to serve new purposes. You step into the throne room of Castile, where morning light streams through stained glass windows, depicting saints and battles, illuminating a queen whose pious exterior conceals one of history's most ruthless political minds. Isabella sits reviewing documents with the careful attention of an accountant, but you realize she's calculating more than royal revenues. She's measuring the price of empire, the cost of religious purity, and the value of exploration that will reshape the known world. The scent of orange blossoms drifts through the palace corridors, but underneath lies something darker. The smoke of burning books, the metallic tang of fear, and the incense that fails to mask the proceedings of the Spanish Inquisition. You watch Isabella's face as she stamps documents that will fund Christopher Columbus while simultaneously authorizing the persecution of conversos and Muslims. Her expression reveals nothing of the internal calculations that balance exploration against expulsion, discovery against destruction. Isabella's path to power began with a civil war that demonstrated her understanding of medieval politics' brutal realities. You witness her struggle against her half-brother Henry IV's attempts to disinherit her in favor of his alleged daughter, Joanna. The legitimacy crisis that plagued Castile for years taught Isabella that power belongs to those strong enough to seize it and clever enough to justify their actions afterward. Her marriage to Ferdinand of Aragon wasn't just romance. It was a strategic alliance that doubled her military resources and created the foundation for Spanish unification. The partnership between Isabella and Ferdinand reveals two complementary approaches to royal authority. While Ferdinand focuses on military campaigns and territorial expansion, you observe Isabella managing the complex internal politics of religious unification and administrative reform. Their famous motto, tanto monta, monta tanto, suggests equality. But you notice how they divide responsibilities according to their individual strengths rather than traditional gender roles. You discover that Isabella's support for Columbus represents far more than curiosity about geographical exploration. Her careful review of his proposals reveals a monarch calculating the potential returns on investment with merchant-like precision. The terms she negotiates give Columbus significant rewards for success, while limiting royal financial exposure if his venture fails. Her willingness to pledge her personal jewelry demonstrates confidence in the enterprise, but also a shrewd understanding of the symbolic value such gestures carry. The fall of Granada in 1492 provides the backdrop for Isabella's most controversial decisions. As you witness the euphoria of Christian reconquest mixing with the practical challenges of governing a newly diverse population, her initial promises of religious tolerance for Muslims seem genuine. But you observe how quickly practical considerations override idealistic intentions. The forced conversions that follow reveal a queen more concerned with political unity than spiritual authenticity. The establishment of the Spanish Inquisition showcases Isabella's ability to transform religious authority into political power. You watch as she negotiates with Pope Sixtus IV for the right to appoint inquisitors, effectively bringing this powerful institution under royal control rather than papal authority. The Inquisition's procedures, confiscation of property, secret accusations, and public punishment create a system of terror that serves political consolidation as much as religious purification. Your attention turns to Isabella's revolutionary approach to royal finance as she implements taxation and administrative reforms that transform medieval Castile into a modern state. Her restructuring of royal revenues, her regulation of municipal governments, and her standardization of legal procedures demonstrate an understanding of governance that anticipates later developments in state building. The wealth flowing from the Americas will soon vindicate her investment in exploration, but her domestic reforms ensure that this treasure can be effectively utilized. The expulsion of the Jews in 1492 represents perhaps Isabella's most calculated act of political cruelty. You witness her deliberations over this decision, observing how economic considerations, the seizure of Jewish property and the elimination of money-lending competition, combined with religious ideology and popular pressure to produce a policy that devastates thousands while enriching the crown. Her ability to present this expulsion as religious necessity while reaping its financial benefits demonstrates the seamless integration of piety and pragmatism that characterizes her reign. Isabella's management of the nobility reveals a sophisticated understanding of aristocratic psychology and medieval power structures. Rather than attempting to crush noble power directly, you observe her strategy of redirecting aristocratic energies toward foreign conquest and religious campaigns. The conquest of Granada, the exploration of the Americas, and the later Italian wars provide outlets for noble ambition while serving royal interests. Her granting of encomiendas in the New World creates new opportunities for aristocratic advancement under royal supervision. The Queen's involvement in her children's marriages demonstrates the international scope of her political vision. You witness her negotiations for Catherine of Aragon's marriage to Arthur, Prince of Wales, recognizing that this alliance could isolate France and secure English support for Spanish interests. Her daughter Joanna's marriage to Philip of Burgundy promises to bring the Low Countries into Spanish orbit, while her son Juan's marriage to Archduchess Margaret strengthens ties with the Habsburg dynasty. You discover that Isabella's court becomes a center of Renaissance, learning that rivals Italian cultural achievements. Her patronage of scholars, her establishment of educational institutions, and her support for printing technology demonstrate an understanding that cultural prestige enhances political authority. The Spanish language's standardization during her reign, the translation of classical works, and the development of historiographical traditions create intellectual foundations for Spanish imperial expansion. The tragic deaths of her children reveal Isabella's personal vulnerability beneath her public strength. You observe her grief at Prince Juan's death, her anguish over Joanna's mental instability, and her concern about the succession crisis these losses create. Her decision to name Joanna as heir, despite obvious incapacity, demonstrates the limitations of even absolute monarchs when confronted with the unpredictability of human nature and the demands of dynastic continuity. Historians still argue whether Isabella's religious policies represented genuine spiritual conviction or cynical political manipulation. Contemporary evidence suggests both motivations interplayed in complex ways, with Isabella apparently believing that religious unity was essential for political stability, while also recognizing the material benefits that religious persecution could provide. You notice how Isabella's gender both constrains and enables her political activities. Traditional expectations of queenly piety provide cover for religious policies that might seem excessively harsh coming from a male ruler, while her maternal role legitimizes her concern for subjects' spiritual welfare, yet her exclusion from military leadership forces her to rely on subordinates whose loyalty must be constantly maintained through careful management of rewards and punishments. The later years of Isabella's reign show a monarch grappling with the unexpected consequences of her earlier successes. The wealth flowing from American exploration creates inflation and economic disruption within Castile, while the religious uniformity achieved through expulsion and conversion generates ongoing security concerns about crypto-Jews and crypto-Muslims. Her efforts to regulate colonial administration reveal a growing awareness that distant territories require different governmental approaches than European domains. Isabella's death in 1504 marks the end of an era in Spanish history. As you witness the immediate succession crisis that follows her demise, her testament reveals a complex personality combining genuine religious devotion with hard-headed political calculation. Her provisions for the treatment of American Indians suggest belated concern about colonial abuses, while her arrangements for government during Joanna's incapacity demonstrate continued focus on dynastic stability. You realize that Isabella of Castile represents the queen consort as nation builder, someone who used traditional religious authority to accomplish unprecedented political transformation. Her legacy includes the unification of Spain, the beginning of American colonization, and the establishment of religious uniformity that would define Spanish culture for centuries. Yet this legacy also encompasses the destruction of religious diversity, the expulsion of productive populations, and the establishment of colonial systems whose effects continue to shape global relationships today. You enter the shadowed galleries of Whitehall Palace, where tapestries depicting biblical scenes hang like protective talismans, and you discover Catherine Parr moving through halls that have witnessed the destruction of 5 queens before her. The 6th and final wife of Henry VIII glides past portraits of her predecessors with studied composure, but you sense the steel beneath her silk gown as she navigates the most dangerous court in Europe with the precision of a diplomat and the courage of a martyr. The woman who became England's most influential queen consort arrives at court already twice widowed, her experience with difficult husbands serving as unexpected preparation for marriage to the most unpredictable monarch in Christendom. You observe 30-year-old Catherine's careful courtship dance with the aging Henry, noting how she balances his intellectual stimulation with maternal comfort, offering the king both scholarly companion and nursemaid as his health deteriorates and his paranoia intensifies. Catherine's acceptance of Henry's marriage proposal in 1543 represents one of history's most calculated personal risks. You witness her private deliberations, weighing the almost certain dangers of royal marriage against the unprecedented opportunities for religious and educational reform. Her previous relationships with Protestant reformers like Thomas Seymour have convinced her that proximity to royal power offers the only hope for advancing the religious changes she believes essential for England's spiritual salvation. The royal wedding ceremony in July 1543 takes place in a palace still haunted by recent executions, and you feel the weight of precedent as Catherine becomes the first English queen to marry a king who has already beheaded 2 wives. Her wedding gown, though magnificent, seems almost like armor as she prepares to enter a role that has proven fatal for 1/3 of its recent occupants. Yet her calm demeanor suggests a woman who has made peace with the dangers she faces. You discover that Catherine's influence begins immediately through her transformation of the royal household into a center of Renaissance, learning, and Protestant scholarship. Her appointment of Protestant tutors for the royal children, her patronage of religious reformers, and her establishment of regular theological discussions demonstrate how a queen consort could advance controversial religious policies through educational and cultural activities that appeared innocuous to conservative observers. The publication of Catherine's prayers or meditations in 1545 marks a revolutionary moment in English royal history, the first book published by a reigning English queen. You read over her shoulder as she crafts prose that appears to support traditional Catholic devotion while subtly advancing Protestant theological positions. Her careful language allows readers to interpret her meaning according to their own religious inclinations, while gradually shifting the discourse toward Reformed Christianity. Catherine's relationship with the royal children reveals her understanding of how personal influence can shape political futures. You observe her careful cultivation of relationships with Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward, noting how she adapts her approach to each child's personality and religious inclinations. Her insistence on providing Elizabeth with a classical education equal to any prince's demonstrates progressive views about female intellectual capacity that will prove crucial for England's future. The conservative reaction against Catherine's religious activities creates the greatest crisis of her queenship. As you witness Stephen Gardiner and his allies maneuvering to destroy her through charges of heresy, the discovery of Protestant books in her chambers, her protection of suspected religious radicals, and her theological debates with Henry himself, provide ammunition for enemies who recognize that eliminating the Queen represents their best chance of halting religious reform. You feel the tension mounting as articles of impeachment are drawn up against Catherine, accusing her of violating the Act of 6 Articles through her Protestant sympathies and her unauthorized theological discussions. The precedent of Catherine Howard's execution for adultery, and Anne Boleyn's destruction on charges of treason demonstrates that Henry requires little legal justification for disposing of unwanted wives when political circumstances demand their removal. Catherine's salvation comes through a masterful manipulation of Henry's psychology during their final confrontation. You witness her carefully crafted submission as she prostrates herself before the king while cleverly reframing her theological interests as feminine intellectual curiosity rather than dangerous religious innovation. Her declaration that she only discussed theology to distract Henry from his physical pain transforms potential treason into wifely devotion, appealing to the king's vanity while providing him with a face-saving justification for reversing his decision. The dramatic scene where Henry's guards arrive to arrest Catherine, only to find the royal couple reconciled, demonstrates the Queen's perfect timing and psychological insight. You observe Henry's rage at his own counselors for attempting to destroy a wife he has decided to keep, noting how Catherine's survival depends not on justice or innocence, but on her ability to read and manipulate the king's mercurial temperament. During Henry's final illness, Catherine effectively becomes regent in all but name, managing royal correspondence, receiving foreign ambassadors, and coordinating government business while the king remains largely bedridden. You watch as she exercises unprecedented authority for an English queen consort, her influence extending far beyond traditional ceremonial functions into the practical governance of the realm. The king's death in January 1547 transforms Catherine from endangered wife to powerful dowager queen, but also exposes her to new dangers as religious and political factions compete for control of the young Edward VI's regency. Her rapid remarriage to Thomas Seymour represents both personal happiness and political miscalculation, as you observe how her romantic desires conflict with the careful political positioning that had ensured her survival during Henry's reign. Historians still argue whether Catherine's Protestant sympathies represented genuine religious conviction or political calculation designed to align herself with the rising reformist faction at court. Her theological writing suggests sincere faith, but her careful navigation of religious controversies demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of how religious positions could serve political purposes. You notice how Catherine's educational reforms extend beyond the royal family to influence broader English society. Her patronage of translators, her support for vernacular religious texts, and her encouragement of female learning helped create the intellectual foundation for the Protestant Reformation's success in England. Her example of a learned queen participating in theological discourse legitimizes similar activities among aristocratic women throughout the realm. Catherine's relationship with Parliament reveals another dimension of her political influence. As you observe her lobbying efforts for religious legislation and her coordination with Protestant members to advance reform measures, her gender prevents direct participation in parliamentary proceedings, but her behind-the-scenes influence helps shape the legislative agenda during the final years of Henry's reign. The publication of Catherine's Lamentation of a Sinner in 1547 provides insight into her theological development and political strategy. You analyze her careful critique of Catholic practices, noting how she condemns religious errors she claims to have previously embraced while avoiding direct attacks on individuals who might seek revenge. Her public confession of past spiritual blindness provides cover for more controversial Protestant positions, while demonstrating the intellectual humility expected of women in theological discourse. Catherine's death in childbirth in 1548 ends a brief but influential career that demonstrates how an intelligent and determined queen consort could advance controversial religious and educational reforms within the constraints of Tudor political culture. Her survival of Henry VIII's increasingly paranoid final years, her protection of Protestant reformers during periods of persecution, and her advancement of female education represent achievements that transcend her relatively short time as queen. You realize that Catherine Parr represents the queen consort as religious reformer, someone who used traditional feminine roles, wife, mother, patron, to advance radical changes in English religious and intellectual life. Her story demonstrates how apparent submission could mask real influence, how scholarly interests could serve political purposes, and how survival in a dangerous court required perfect timing, psychological insight, and the courage to risk everything for principles that transcended personal safety. You step into the gilded corridors of Versailles, where the scent of powder and perfume mingles with whispered conspiracies, and discover a young German princess plotting the overthrow of her own husband while masquerading as a dutiful wife. Catherine II moves through these opulent halls with the grace of a dancer, but you sense the predator beneath the silken jewels as she calculates each smile, each curtsy, each carefully timed appearance that will eventually place the crown of all the Russias upon her foreign head. The transformation begins in the modest chambers of untold, where you observe 15-year-old Sophie Friederike Auguste studying Russian language and Orthodox theology with the intensity of a spy preparing for deep cover. Her mother's political ambitions and Frederick the Great's maneuvering have arranged her betrothal to the heir of the Russian throne, but you witness Sophie's recognition that survival in the Russian court will require complete reinvention of her identity and purpose. The journey to St. Petersburg reveals the scope of Sophie's challenge as you travel alongside her through landscapes that stretch beyond imagination toward a court where German efficiency meets Slavic passion in often explosive combinations. Her conversion to Russian Orthodoxy and adoption of the name Catherine represents more than religious formality. It's the first step in a methodical campaign to become more Russian than the Russians themselves. You observe Catherine's early years at the court of Empress Elizabeth, noting how she navigates between competing factions while maintaining the appearance of innocuous foreign princess. Her marriage to Grand Duke Peter in 1745 joins two of the most mismatched personalities in royal history, and you witness how their incompatibility becomes Catherine's opportunity to study Russian politics without the distractions of romantic happiness or domestic harmony. The peculiarities of Catherine's marriage provide both protection and strategic advantage, as you discover that Peter's obvious unfitness for rule creates a constituency of nobles, officials, and military officers seeking alternative leadership. Catherine's careful cultivation of these relationships, disguised as social friendliness and intellectual curiosity, builds the network that will eventually support her coup against her own husband. Catherine's intellectual development during these years transforms her from provincial German princess into Enlightenment philosopher queen. You observe her correspondence with Voltaire, her study of Montesquieu's political theories, and her engagement with the ideas that are reshaping European thought. Yet you also notice how she adapts these Western concepts to Russian realities, recognizing that philosophical principles must be modified to serve practical political purposes. The birth of her son Paul in 1754 provides Catherine with both vulnerability and legitimacy, as you witness Empress Elizabeth's immediate seizure of the infant to ensure proper Russian upbringing. This separation creates pain, but also opportunity, freeing Catherine from maternal obligations while establishing her status as mother of the future heir. Her subsequent relationships with Grigory Orlov and other favorites demonstrate how she balances personal needs with political calculations. You discover that Catherine's preparation for power extends far beyond court intrigue into serious study of governmental administration, military organization, and economic theory. Her secret correspondence with foreign diplomats reveals a sophisticated understanding of international politics, while her discussions with Russian officials demonstrate mastery of domestic policy details that will prove crucial during her eventual reign. The 7 Years' War provides Catherine with opportunities to observe Peter's catastrophic mismanagement of Russian interests, as you witness his bizarre admiration for Frederick the Great, despite Prussia's status as Russia's enemy. Peter's decision to abandon Russian territorial gains and switch sides in the conflict demonstrates the incompetence that will eventually justify Catherine's coup in the minds of Russian patriots. Elizabeth's death in January 1762 brings Peter III to the throne and begins the final phase of Catherine's patient campaign. You watch as the new emperor immediately alienates the Orthodox Church through his attacks on religious traditions, horrifies the military through his Prussian sympathies, and disgusts the nobility through his childish behavior and obvious contempt for Russian customs. The planning of Catherine's coup reveals her evolution into a master conspirator, as you observe her coordination with key military units, her cultivation of influential nobles, and her careful timing of the rebellion to coincide with Peter's absence from the capital. Her ability to maintain secrecy while organizing such a complex operation demonstrates political skills that will serve her well during nearly 4 decades of absolute rule. The events of June 28, 1762, showcase Catherine's remarkable combination of courage and calculation as you witness her dramatic appearance before the Izmailovsky Guards in a borrowed uniform, her passionate appeal to Russian patriotism, and her triumphant march to the Winter Palace as soldiers and nobles rally to her banner. The transformation from foreign princess to Russian empress occurs in a single day, but represents the culmination of 17 years of careful preparation. Peter III's mysterious death, shortly after his abdication, removes the final obstacle to Catherine's consolidation of power. Though you notice how she maintains plausible deniability regarding his demise, while ensuring that no potential restoration movement can rally around a living ex-emperor. Her immediate assumption of absolute authority demonstrates confidence born of long preparation and careful planning. Historians still argue whether Catherine's coup represented a legitimate response to Peter's incompetence or an opportunistic seizure of power by an ambitious foreigner. Contemporary evidence suggests that Russian elite opinion genuinely supported her action, recognizing that Peter's continued rule threatened the empire's stability and international position. You observe how Catherine's early reign demonstrates her sophisticated understanding of Russian political culture, as she immediately reverses Peter's unpopular policies while presenting herself as restorer of traditional Russian values rather than foreign innovator. Her coronation ceremony in Moscow deliberately evokes ancient precedents while subtly introducing reforms that will modernize Russian governance. The publication of Catherine's nakaz, or instruction, reveals her attempt to codify Enlightenment principles within a Russian legal framework. You examine her careful balance between progressive ideals and conservative realities, noting how she advocates for legal reforms while avoiding direct challenges to serfdom and autocracy that might threaten her political base. Catherine's territorial expansion through wars with the Ottoman Empire and the annexation of Crimea demonstrates how she channels Russian imperial ambitions toward traditionally acceptable targets while avoiding conflicts that might drain resources needed for domestic reforms. Her military successes provide legitimacy for a foreign-born ruler while advancing Russian strategic interests. The management of Pugachev's rebellion tests Catherine's political skills under extreme pressure, as you witness her response to the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Her combination of military force with political reform demonstrates an understanding that successful governance requires both strength and flexibility, coercion and accommodation. Catherine's famous lovers become part of her political system rather than mere personal indulgences, as you observe how figures like Grigory Orlov, Grigory Potemkin, and others serve as advisors, administrators, and military commanders while providing companionship and emotional support. Her ability to maintain personal relationships while advancing state interests demonstrates the integration of private and public life that characterizes absolute monarchy. You realize that Catherine the Great represents the queen consort as revolutionary, someone who used traditional feminine roles to conceal radical political ambitions until the moment came to strike. Her transformation from German princess to Russian empress demonstrates how intelligence, patience, and strategic thinking could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles when combined with perfect timing and ruthless execution. Her reign would prove that power seized through conspiracy could be legitimized through effective governance and territorial expansion. You glide through the marble halls of Versailles, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbow reflections on powdered faces, and the rustle of silk masks the sound of sharpening guillotines in distant Paris streets. Marie Antoinette adjusts her elaborate headdress in a mirror that will soon reflect the flames of revolution. But you discover that beneath the infamous reputation for frivolity lies a woman whose political maneuvering was far more sophisticated than history often acknowledges. The 14-year-old Archduchess who arrived from Vienna in 1770 brought more than just a Habsburg marriage alliance to Versailles. She carried the weight of her mother's ambitions and the burden of serving as Austria's permanent ambassador to the French court. You observe young Marie Antoinette's initial struggles with French court etiquette, her homesickness for Austrian customs, and her gradual recognition that survival at Versailles requires mastering political skills that no convent education had taught her. The delayed consummation of her marriage to the future Louis XIII creates both vulnerability and opportunity, as you witness how court gossips transform private embarrassment into public scandal, while Marie Antoinette learns to navigate the treacherous currents of palace intrigue. Her apparent frivolity during these early years masks careful observation of French political dynamics and strategic cultivation of relationships that will serve her later purposes. You discover that Marie Antoinette's infamous spending on fashion and entertainment serves multiple political functions beyond mere personal pleasure. Her patronage of French silk manufacturers and furniture makers demonstrates royal support for domestic industry, while her elaborate court ceremonies maintain the theatrical display of royal magnificence that legitimizes Bourbon authority. Her gambling losses, though genuine, also facilitate informal negotiations with court nobles who might otherwise lack access to royal favor. The birth of her children transforms Marie Antoinette from decorative consort into protective mother whose political actions increasingly focus on securing her offspring's inheritance. You observe how maternal anxiety drives her involvement in policy decisions, foreign negotiations, and financial arrangements that appear to serve Austrian interests, but actually protect her children's future claims to French territories and revenues. Marie Antoinette's correspondence with her brother, Emperor Joseph II, reveals a sophisticated understanding of European diplomatic balance. As you read her analysis of French foreign policy, her warnings about British naval power, and her recommendations for Austrian strategy during the American Revolutionary War. Her letters demonstrate political acumen that contradicts popular images of an empty-headed queen obsessed only with fashion and parties. The diamond necklace affair of 1785 showcases both Marie Antoinette's political vulnerability and her remarkable ability to survive scandal through careful crisis management. You witness her shock at discovering that her reputation has been exploited by criminals, her methodical efforts to clear her name through legal proceedings, and her recognition that public opinion has become a political force that even absolute monarchs must consider. You notice how Marie Antoinette's Austrian connections become simultaneously her greatest asset and her most dangerous liability as revolutionary tensions mount. Her access to Habsburg intelligence networks provides valuable information about European developments, but her family loyalties also expose her to charges of treason when France and Austria become enemies during the Revolutionary Wars. The early phases of the French Revolution reveal Marie Antoinette's evolution from reluctant political participant into determined counter-revolutionary strategist. You observe her initial hopes that constitutional monarchy might preserve royal authority while satisfying popular demands, followed by her growing conviction that only foreign intervention can restore traditional order and protect her family's safety. The royal family's attempted flight to Varennes in June 1791 demonstrates both Marie Antoinette's courage and her miscalculation of revolutionary dynamics. You travel alongside the disguised royal family as they flee Paris, noting how the Queen's insistence on maintaining certain comforts slows their progress, while her correspondence with Austrian commanders provides revolutionaries with evidence of treasonous foreign collaboration. Marie Antoinette's secret negotiations with moderate revolutionary leaders reveal her sophisticated understanding of factional politics within the new regime. You observe her attempts to work with constitutional monarchists like Mirabeau and Barnave, recognizing that survival requires adapting to changed circumstances while working to protect essential royal prerogatives and family interests. The Queen's relationship with Count Axel von Fersen adds a personal dimension to her political activities, as you witness how romantic attachment and political alliance interweave in ways that serve both emotional needs and strategic purposes. Fersen's position as Swedish diplomat provides cover for communications with foreign courts, while his devotion to Marie Antoinette ensures absolute loyalty during increasingly dangerous circumstances. You discover that Marie Antoinette's apparent political passivity during the revolution's radical phase actually masks intensive behind-the-scenes activity, coordinating with émigré nobles, foreign courts, and counter-revolutionary movements within France. Her encoded correspondence reveals detailed knowledge of military preparations, financial arrangements, and strategic planning that contradicts images of a helpless victim swept along by historical forces. The storming of the Tuileries Palace in August 1792 forces Marie Antoinette to confront the complete collapse of royal authority, but you observe how she maintains dignity and political focus even while facing immediate physical danger. Her calm behavior during the family's imprisonment demonstrates personal courage, while her continued correspondence with supporters shows persistent hope for restoration or escape. Historians still argue whether Marie Antoinette's political activities during the Revolution represented legitimate attempts to preserve constitutional order or treasonous collaboration with foreign enemies. Evidence suggests that her motivations combine genuine concern for French stability with a natural desire to protect her family and preserve their ancestral rights. You notice how Marie Antoinette's trial before the Revolutionary Tribunal transforms her from political actor into symbolic victim, as prosecutors focus more on her alleged moral corruption than her actual political activities. Her dignified responses to accusations reveal intelligence and courage that contradict revolutionary propaganda, depicting her as frivolous and incompetent. The Queen's final letters reveal a sophisticated understanding of her historical situation as you read her analysis of revolutionary dynamics, her predictions about future political developments, and her instructions for her children's education and moral development. Her testament demonstrates political wisdom gained through bitter experience with the costs of ideological extremism and popular violence. Marie Antoinette's execution in October 1793 eliminates not just a person, but a symbol, as you witness how her death represents the revolution's complete rejection of traditional monarchy and aristocratic privilege. Yet her final words and dignified behavior during execution also provide counter-revolutionary movements with a powerful martyrdom narrative that will influence European politics for decades. The posthumous reputation of Marie Antoinette demonstrates how political figures can be transformed by historical memory. As you observe how her image evolves from hated symbol of aristocratic excess to tragic victim of revolutionary violence. This transformation reflects changing attitudes toward monarchy, femininity, and political violence rather than new evidence about her actual character or activities. You realize that Marie Antoinette represents the queen consort as political victim, someone whose foreign birth, cultural differences, and gender made her vulnerable to attack when traditional order collapsed. Yet beneath the victimization lies evidence of sophisticated political intelligence, genuine concern for her adopted country's welfare, and remarkable personal courage under extreme pressure. Her story demonstrates how even the most privileged women could become casualties when historical forces beyond individual control reshape entire civilizations. The echoes of her carriage wheels on cobblestones fade into the distance, but you sense that her legacy extends far beyond the tragic end that defines popular memory. In the political maneuvering, the maternal devotion, and the dignified resistance to revolutionary extremism, you glimpse a complex figure whose true story remains partially hidden beneath centuries of myth and propaganda. You drift through the shadowed corridors of the Ottoman Imperial Palace, where the scent of rosewater mingles with whispered plots, and discover a world where mothers of princes wield power that rivals sultans while remaining forever hidden behind silken veils. The harem, which Western imagination often reduces to exotic fantasy, reveals itself as the most sophisticated political institution in the Islamic world, where intelligence, patience, and strategic alliances determine who will rule the greatest empire of its age. The sound of fountain water masks conversations that reshape empires, as you observe women whose official powerlessness conceals influence that extends from the Black Sea to the Persian Gulf. These are not the passive concubines of European imagination, but political operatives whose mastery of palace intrigue often exceeds that of the grand viziers and military commanders who officially govern the Ottoman state. You enter the world of the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, who stands at the apex of this feminine hierarchy. Her apartments overlook the Golden Horn, but her attention focuses on intelligence reports from across 3 continents. Through networks of former palace women now married to provincial governors, through trusted eunuchs managing imperial estates, through daughters married into noble families, she maintains awareness of political developments that sometimes exceeds the Sultan's own knowledge. The institution of Devshirme, the collection of Christian boys for conversion and elite training, creates unexpected connections between the harem and the highest levels of imperial administration. You discover how palace women maintain relationships with these recruited officials, creating bonds of loyalty that transcend ethnic and religious boundaries. A Circassian concubine might find herself advising policies that affect her people's homeland, while a Georgian princess could influence appointments that determine her region's governance. The rise of Roxolana, who became the legal wife of Suleiman the Magnificent, transforms the entire structure of Ottoman royal succession. You witness her unprecedented elevation from concubine to Haseki Sultan, breaking centuries of tradition that prohibited sultans from marriage after assuming the throne. Her influence over imperial policy, her correspondence with foreign rulers, and her architectural patronage demonstrate how individual ambition could reshape even the most rigid institutional frameworks. You observe the complex dynamics of succession politics within the harem, where mothers compete not just for their sons' advancement, but for the survival of their entire households. The Ottoman practice of fratricide, the execution of unsuccessful claimants to prevent civil war, means that palace women are literally fighting for their children's lives when they maneuver for imperial favor and political support. The architectural layout of the harem itself reflects its political function as you explore courtyards and chambers designed to facilitate both privacy and surveillance. The strategic positioning of apartments, the carefully controlled access routes, and the elaborate protocols governing movement and communication create a physical environment where information flows according to hierarchical relationships and political alliances. Education within the harem reveals another dimension of its political significance as you discover schools where young women learn languages, literature, music, and the arts of conversation that will make them valuable diplomatic assets. These palace women often become more cosmopolitan and intellectually sophisticated than their male counterparts, their education deliberately designed to enhance their usefulness in negotiations and cultural exchanges. The economic power controlled by harem women often surprises Western observers as you examine records showing vast estates, commercial investments, and charitable foundations managed by palace women. The Valid Sultan's personal wealth frequently exceeds that of European monarchs, while her charitable activities create networks of obligation and gratitude throughout the empire's territories. You witness the harem's role in Ottoman diplomacy through the marriages of imperial daughters and sisters to provincial governors, foreign allies, and powerful nobles. These unions create kinship networks that serve imperial interests while providing the women involved with political influence in their new homes. A sultan's daughter married to the governor of Egypt becomes an unofficial ambassador for imperial policy while protecting her own interests and those of her children. The institution of the Kira Jewish women who served as intermediaries between the harem and the outside world, reveals the sophisticated commercial and political connections maintained by palace women. Through these agents, harem residents engage in international trade, diplomatic correspondence, and intelligence gathering that supplements official governmental activities. Their commercial success often provides them with independent resources that enhance their political influence. Religious patronage offers another avenue for harem influence as you observe palace women founding mosques, schools, hospitals, and other institutions throughout the empire. These projects serve genuine charitable purposes while creating visible monuments to their patrons' piety and generosity. The public gratitude generated by such benefactions translates into political support that can prove crucial during succession crises or policy disputes. The Sultanate of Women period during the late 16th and early 17th centuries demonstrates the harem's potential for direct political control as you witness a succession of powerful mothers and wives effectively ruling the empire during the reigns of weak or incompetent sultans. Figures like Nurbanu Sultan, Safiye Sultan, and Kosem Sultan exercise authority that extends far beyond traditional feminine roles into military appointments, financial policy, and diplomatic negotiations. Historians still argue whether the political prominence of harem women during this period represented corruption of traditional Ottoman institutions or natural adaptation to changing imperial circumstances. The evidence suggests that female political participation increased when external pressures and internal challenges required maximum utilization of available talent, regardless of gender restrictions. You notice how the harem's political influence operates through indirect channels that make it difficult for contemporary observers and modern historians to trace precise mechanisms of power. Unlike European queens whose authority derives from legal status and public ceremony, Ottoman palace women exercise influence through personal relationships, economic resources, and informal networks that leave fewer documentary traces. The training of eunuchs reveals another aspect of harem political organization, as you observe how these intermediary figures are carefully selected and educated to serve as reliable agents in the complex negotiations between feminine political power and masculine governmental authority. Their unique position outside normal gender categories allows them to move between harem and divan while maintaining loyalty to their palace patrons. The decline of harem political influence during the 18th and 19th centuries reflects broader changes in Ottoman imperial structure, as European military pressure and internal reform movements gradually reduced the effectiveness of traditional palace politics. Yet, even during periods of apparent decline, you observe individual women maintaining significant influence through strategic marriages, commercial activities, and religious patronage. The physical destruction of much of the old palace complex during the 19th century eliminates not just buildings, but entire networks of relationships and institutional memory that had sustained feminine political participation for centuries. The modernization efforts of sultans like Mahmud II and Abdul-Mejid deliberately target traditional power centers that might resist imperial reform, including the political networks centered in the harem. You realize that the Ottoman harem represents the ultimate expression of hidden feminine power, a political institution that operated parallel to official governmental structures while maintaining the appearance of domestic seclusion. These women ruled through influence rather than authority, through relationships rather than titles, through patience rather than force. Their story demonstrates how cultural restrictions on female political participation could be circumvented by those intelligent enough to work within traditional systems while gradually reshaping them to serve their purposes. You step through the corridors of the Louvre during the tumultuous years of the early 17th century, where the scent of incense from daily masses mingles with the metallic tang of political intrigue, and discover Marie de Medici orchestrating French foreign policy from behind a facade of maternal devotion and religious piety. The widow of Henry IV moves through these corridors with the bearing of someone who has learned to transform grief into power, regency into empire building. The assassination of Henry IV in 1610 transforms Marie from decorative Italian consort into the most powerful woman in Europe overnight. As you witness her immediate assumption of the regency for 9-year-old Louis XIV, her hands still trembling from the shock of her husband's murder. Signed documents that will determine France's role in the great European conflicts brewing across the continent. The blood on Parisian streets is barely dry when she's already calculating how to preserve French interests against the Habsburg encirclement that threatens to strangle her adopted homeland. You observe Marie's early struggles with the French nobility, who view her Florentine origins with suspicion that borders on xenophobia. The same aristocrats who had grudgingly accepted her as Henry's wife now question her fitness to govern France, their doubts amplified by her thick Italian accent and her apparent preference for Italian advisors. Yet you notice how she transforms these perceived weaknesses into strategic advantages, using her foreign connections to gather intelligence and her outsider status to mediate between competing French factions. The complexity of Marie's position becomes apparent as you examine her diplomatic correspondence, where maternal concern for her son's welfare interweaves with sophisticated analysis of European power balance. Her letters to the Pope reveal a woman using religious devotion as diplomatic currency, while her communications with Spanish ambassadors demonstrate her understanding that France must maintain peaceful relations with Habsburg territories despite fundamental conflicts of interest. Marie's relationship with her son Louis XIV provides the central drama of her regency as you witness the gradual tension between maternal protection, and royal independence. Her attempts to control the young king's education, his marriage negotiations, and his early policy decisions reflect genuine concern for his welfare, combined with reluctance to surrender the power that regency has provided. The psychological dynamics between protective mother and assertive son mirror the broader political struggle between traditional noble privilege and emerging royal absolutism. You discover that Marie's patronage of arts and architecture serves political purposes that extend far beyond personal taste or cultural prestige. The construction of the Luxembourg Palace represents not just architectural magnificence, but a statement about Medici resources and French royal stability. Her commissioning of Rubens's famous cycle depicting her own life creates visual propaganda that legitimizes her regency while celebrating Franco-Italian alliance and female political authority. The marriage negotiations for Louis XV reveal Marie's sophisticated understanding of European diplomatic chess as you observe her maneuvering between potential alliances that could reshape continental politics. Her preference for Spanish matches reflects both her Catholic convictions and her strategic assessment that Habsburg friendship offers the best protection for French interests. Yet, her willingness to consider Protestant alternatives demonstrates pragmatic flexibility when religious principle conflicts with political necessity. Marie's management of French finances during the Regency showcases her merchant family's understanding of state economics as you examine her efforts to reduce the massive debts inherited from Henry IV's reign while funding the military preparations necessary for France's emerging role as European hegemon. Her negotiations with Italian bankers, her reforms of tax collection, and her careful management of royal expenditures demonstrate administrative competence that contradicts contemporary criticism of her supposed extravagance. The Estates General of 1614 provides Marie with an opportunity to demonstrate her political skills before a national audience, as you witness her careful orchestration of proceedings that formally ratify her regency while avoiding commitments that might limit royal authority. Her speeches to the assembled representatives reveal a woman who has mastered the rhetoric of French monarchy while maintaining the substance of her own political agenda. You observe how Marie's religious policies balance genuine Catholic conviction with the practical needs of governing a religiously divided kingdom. Her support for the Counter-Reformation, her patronage of Jesuit education, and her devotion to the Virgin Mary serve both spiritual needs and political purposes by demonstrating royal commitment to Catholic orthodoxy. Yet, her careful protection of Huguenot rights under the Edict of Nantes shows understanding that religious persecution could destabilize the realm. The emergence of Cardinal Richelieu as Marie's protégé and eventual rival creates one of history's most complex political relationships, as you watch the widow regent mentor the man who will eventually exile her from France. Her initial recognition of Richelieu's abilities, her promotion of his career, and her gradual realization that his vision of royal authority threatens her own influence demonstrate both political insight and the inevitable limitations of patronage-based power. Marie's involvement in the negotiations leading to the Treaty of Loudun reveals her continued influence over French foreign policy, even as Louis XV assumes greater personal control of governance. You witness her behind-the-scenes efforts to moderate her son's military ambitions while protecting the diplomatic relationships she has carefully cultivated during her regency years. The Day of the Dupes in 1630 represents the final confrontation between Marie's vision of shared monarchy and Richelieu's program of royal absolutism, as you observe the dramatic palace intrigue that forces Louis XIV to choose between his mother and his minister. Marie's confidence that maternal authority would triumph over ministerial advice demonstrates both her strength and her ultimate miscalculation of how completely French political culture was changing. Historians still argue whether Marie's political activities represented enlightened female governance or dangerous foreign interference in French affairs. Contemporary evidence suggests that her policies generally served French interests while advancing her own family's position, a combination that characterized most successful early modern rulers regardless of gender. You notice how Marie's exile to the Spanish Netherlands transforms her from French political actor into European diplomatic figure, as she maintains correspondence with courts across the continent while plotting her return to influence. Her presence in Brussels creates an alternative center of French political authority that complicates Richelieu's efforts to centralize governmental control under royal authority. The irony of Marie's final years becomes apparent as you observe how the foreign connections that had made her suspect in France now provide her with resources and influence that transcend national boundaries. Her position as Dowager Queen of France, combined with her Medici inheritance and her Habsburg connections, makes her a significant figure in European politics, despite her exclusion from direct participation in French governance. Marie's death in Cologne in 1642 removes one of the last representatives of the older political order that had balanced royal authority against noble privilege and foreign influence. You witness how her funeral becomes an international event attended by representatives from across Catholic Europe, demonstrating the respect that her political skills had earned even among those who had opposed her policies. The posthumous reputation of Marie de Medici reflects the broader historical tension between national loyalty and dynastic loyalty that characterized early modern European politics. Her defenders emphasize her devotion to French interests and her successful preservation of royal authority during a crucial transitional period, while her critics focus on her Italian origins and her alleged preference for foreign advice over French counsel. You realize that Marie de Medici represents the queen consort as international politician, someone who used traditional feminine roles to advance diplomatic agendas that transcended national boundaries while serving the interests of both her adopted homeland and her natal family. Her story demonstrates how the complex loyalties of royal marriage could create opportunities for sophisticated political maneuvering by women who understood that effective governance in early modern Europe required balancing competing obligations and multiple identities. You step through the fog-shrouded corridors of Buckingham Palace, where the scent of Earl Grey mingles with whispered diplomatic secrets, and discover Queen Alexandra moving through the shadows of Edward VII's reign with the quiet determination of someone who understands that preventing wars requires more delicate work than winning them. Her Danish accent barely perceptible after decades in England, she glides between drawing rooms where crowned heads gather, her presence so familiar that statesmen forget she's memorizing their every word. The princess who arrived from Copenhagen in 1863 brought more than Nordic beauty to her marriage with the future Edward VII. She carried the complex loyalties of a Danish royal family caught between German and Russian alliances. You observe young Alexandra's early recognition that her position as British princess would require careful navigation between competing family loyalties, as her father, King Christian IX's children, scattered across European thrones like pieces on a diplomatic chessboard. You witness Alexandra's gradual mastery of British court protocol, noting how she transforms her initial disadvantage as foreign princess into strategic advantage as European insider. Her sister Dagmar's marriage to the future Alexander III of Russia creates a direct connection to the Romanov court, while her brother George's succession to the Greek throne provides British influence in the Eastern Mediterranean. These family networks become Alexandra's private diplomatic channels, operating parallel to official governmental communications. The complexity of Alexandra's position becomes apparent during the Schleswig-Holstein crisis, as you observe her struggle between British governmental policy and Danish family loyalty. Her homeland's defeat by Prussian forces creates personal anguish that she must carefully conceal while maintaining the appearance of supporting British neutrality. Yet her private correspondence reveals how she uses her position to gather intelligence about German military capabilities and political intentions. You discover that Alexandra's famous beauty serves political purposes beyond mere social advantage, as her presence at diplomatic receptions and state functions creates opportunities for informal negotiations that supplement formal treaty discussions. Foreign ambassadors compete for invitations to her drawing rooms, where conversations about music and fashion mask, discussions of military alliances and commercial agreements. Alexandra's relationship with her mother-in-law, Queen Victoria, reveals the intergenerational tensions within British royal diplomacy, as you witness conflicts between Victorian caution and Edwardian engagement with European politics. Alexandra's advocacy for more active British involvement in continental affairs often conflicts with Victoria's preference for splendid isolation, creating family dynamics that mirror broader debates about Britain's international role. The death of Victoria in 1901 transforms Alexandra from Princess of Wales into Queen Consort at a moment when European politics are reaching critical instability. You observe her immediate assumption of enhanced diplomatic responsibilities as she begins hosting an expanded series of royal visits and international conferences that will characterize Edward VII's reign. Her fluency in German, French, and Russian makes her invaluable as interpreter during complex multilateral negotiations. You notice how Alexandra's deafness, result of childhood illness, becomes an unexpected diplomatic asset that allows her to claim misunderstanding when conversations become politically dangerous, while actually hearing everything through lip-reading skills that she carefully conceals. Foreign diplomats often speak more freely in her presence, assuming that her hearing impairment limits her political usefulness. The Entente Cordiale negotiations of 1904 showcase Alexandra's behind-the-scenes diplomatic influence as you observe her cultivation of relationships with French officials that help overcome decades of Anglo-French antagonism. Her charm offensive during state visits to Paris creates personal bonds that facilitate the formal treaty discussions, while her correspondence with French royal relatives provides unofficial channels for resolving sensitive issues. Alexandra's management of the complex family relationships among European royalty requires diplomatic skills that often exceed those of professional ambassadors. You witness her careful mediation between her brother-in-law Kaiser Wilhelm II and her nephew Tsar Nicholas II, recognizing that personal slights and family grievances can escalate into international crises when they occur among crowned heads. The Russo-Japanese War creates particular challenges for Alexandra's diplomatic position, as you observe her attempts to maintain British neutrality while supporting her Russian relatives against Japanese aggression. Her private correspondence with Tsarina Alexandra reveals the emotional toll of watching family members suffer military defeats while officially remaining neutral in British governmental policy. You discover that Alexandra's charitable activities, particularly her work with hospitals and nursing organizations, serve intelligence-gathering purposes that supplement official diplomatic reporting. Her visits to military facilities, her conversations with wounded soldiers, and her correspondence with medical personnel provide her with information about military capabilities and morale that proves valuable during international negotiations. The naval arms race between Britain and Germany creates opportunities for Alexandra to exercise her most sophisticated diplomatic skills as you witness her attempts to moderate the militaristic enthusiasms of both her husband and her German relatives. Her advocacy for limitations on battleship construction reflects both genuine pacifist conviction and shrewd assessment that uncontrolled military competition increases the likelihood of accidental war. Alexandra's role in managing the crisis surrounding the Dogger Bank incident demonstrates her understanding of how minor diplomatic disputes can escalate into major international conflicts. You observe her private interventions with Russian officials, her coordination with British naval authorities, and her successful efforts to prevent what could have become a disastrous Anglo-Russian war over a misunderstood fishing fleet encounter. The Moroccan crises of 1905 and 1911 reveal Alexandra's growing influence over British foreign policy. As you witness her participation in the complex negotiations that maintain the balance between French colonial ambitions and German demands for commercial access. Her understanding of both French and German perspectives, gained through family connections and personal relationships, makes her invaluable as unofficial mediator. Historians still argue whether Alexandra's diplomatic activities represented appropriate queenly involvement in foreign affairs or dangerous interference in governmental policy. The evidence suggests that her interventions generally supported official British positions while providing additional channels for communication that proved particularly valuable during crisis situations. You notice how Alexandra's influence operates through personal relationships rather than institutional authority, making her diplomatic contributions difficult to trace in official records. Her effectiveness depends on the trust and affection she cultivates among European royalty, diplomats, and political leaders who value her discretion and appreciate her genuine concern for preventing armed conflict. The final years before World War I show Alexandra increasingly frustrated by her inability to prevent the alliance system from hardening into opposing camps, as you observe her desperate attempts to maintain family harmony among European royalty despite growing political antagonisms. Her correspondence reveals a growing awareness that personal diplomacy has limitations when confronted with nationalist passions and military planning. The outbreak of war in 1914 represents the ultimate failure of Alexandra's pacifist diplomacy. Yet you witness how her network of relationships continues to provide valuable intelligence and occasional opportunities for peace negotiations even during active hostilities. Her position as enemy of her German relatives creates personal anguish, while potentially offering channels for ending the conflict through negotiated settlement. Alexandra's wartime activities demonstrate her adaptation from preventive diplomacy to wartime leadership, as you observe her transformation of drawing room negotiations into hospital administration, charity organization, and morale maintenance. Her visible dedication to war relief efforts helps maintain civilian support for military operations, while providing cover for continued intelligence gathering and occasional peace feelers. You realize that Queen Alexandra represents the queen consort as secret diplomat, someone who used traditional feminine roles to advance sophisticated peacekeeping agendas that operated below the threshold of official governmental attention. Her story demonstrates how family relationships among European royalty could be mobilized to prevent conflicts or manage crises when formal diplomatic channels proved inadequate. Her legacy lies not in treaties signed or battles won, but in wars prevented and crises diffused through the patient cultivation of personal trust and mutual understanding across national boundaries. You enter the amber-lit chambers of the Alexander Palace, where the scent of holy oil mingles with the whispered prayers of mystics, and discover Alexandra Theodorovna kneeling before icons in a desperate attempt to save both her son and her empire through divine intervention. The German princess, who became Russia's last empress, moves through these halls like a sleepwalker caught between two worlds, the rational enlightenment of her European upbringing and the mystical orthodoxy she has embraced with the fervor of a convert seeking salvation. The shadows lengthen across Persian carpets as you observe Alexandra's transformation from the confident young woman who captured Nicholas II's heart into the haunted figure whose influence over imperial policy will help precipitate one of history's most catastrophic revolutions. Her hands tremble not from fear, but from the desperate urgency of someone who believes that the fate of 300 years of Romanov rule depends on her ability to channel divine power through earthly intermediaries. You witness the birth of Tsarevich Alexei, the long-awaited heir whose hemophilia immediately transforms celebration into a closely guarded state secret. Alexandra's discovery of her son's condition creates the central obsession that will dominate her political activities for the remainder of her life. The bleeding episodes that could kill the future Tsar become Alexandra's private hell, driving her toward increasingly desperate searches for miraculous cures and supernatural protection. The isolation that hemophilia imposes on the imperial family serves Alexandra's temperamental preferences while creating dangerous political consequences. You observe how her need to protect Alexei from injury and publicity gradually separates the royal household from the broader Russian aristocracy, creating a court culture that operates according to mystical rather than political principles. The empress, who should be cultivating noble loyalty, instead alienates potential supporters through her apparent withdrawal from social obligations. Grigory Rasputin's appearance at court in 1907 provides Alexandra with the spiritual advisor she desperately seeks as you witness their first meeting and her immediate recognition that this Siberian peasant possesses powers that medical science cannot explain. His apparent ability to stop Alexei's bleeding through prayer and hypnosis transforms him from court curiosity into imperial necessity, despite the obvious political dangers his presence creates. You discover that Alexandra's relationship with Rasputin extends far beyond her son's medical needs and a comprehensive reliance on mystical guidance for political decisions. Her letters reveal how she consults the starets about ministerial appointments, military strategy, and legislative proposals, treating his peasant intuitions as divine revelation. The woman who should be advising her husband about governance instead channels the advice of a man whose understanding of statecraft derives from village politics and religious ecstasy. The outbreak of World War I transforms Alexandra's mystical preoccupations into direct political interference, as you observe her assumption of quasi-governmental authority during Nicholas's absence at military headquarters. Her letters to the Tsar reveal a woman convinced that divine providence has chosen her to save Russia from military defeat and revolutionary chaos through spiritual intervention and authoritarian governance. Alexandra's German birth becomes a devastating political liability during wartime, as you witness how public suspicion of her loyalty combines with resentment of Rasputin's influence to create a toxic narrative about foreign corruption of Russian imperial authority. The German woman and the peasant mystic become symbols of everything wrong with Romanov rule, their alleged conspiracy blamed for military defeats and domestic chaos beyond their actual responsibility. You observe Alexandra's increasing isolation from Russian reality as she retreats into a world of prayer, mysticism, and conspiracy theories that bear little relationship to the political and military crises facing the empire. Her correspondence reveals growing paranoia about enemies within the court, combined with absolute confidence that divine intervention will ultimately vindicate her policies and destroy Russia's enemies. The dismissal of capable ministers like Stolypin and their replacement with Rasputin's favorites demonstrates how Alexandra's mystical politics undermines effective governance during the empire's greatest crisis. You witness her active campaigning for incompetent appointees whose only qualification is the starets' endorsement, creating a governmental system based on superstition rather than competence. Alexandra's resistance to political reform reflects both her German understanding of monarchical authority and her mystical conviction that constitutional limitations on imperial power violate divine will. You observe her arguments against the Duma's expanded authority, her opposition to ministerial responsibility, and her insistence that autocracy represents God's chosen form of government for Russia. The military disasters of 1915 and 1916 failed to shake Alexandra's confidence in mystical solutions to political problems, as you witness her increasing reliance on Rasputin's guidance, despite mounting evidence of his corrupting influence on imperial policy. Her letters reveal a woman so convinced of her spiritual mission that she cannot recognize the political catastrophe her actions are creating. Rasputin's assassination in December 1916 removes Alexandra's primary spiritual advisor, but fails to restore her connection to political reality. You observe her reaction to the murder, grief for a lost friend combined with terror about her son's medical vulnerability, while remaining oblivious to the popular celebration that greets news of the starets' death. The February Revolution of 1917 catches Alexandra completely unprepared, as you witness her shock at discovering that the mystical protection she believed surrounded the imperial family has proven illusory. Her frantic telegrams to Nicholas reveal a woman whose understanding of revolutionary dynamics derives from prayer rather than political analysis. Alexander's behavior during the family's captivity demonstrates both personal dignity and continued detachment from political reality. You observe her maintenance of court protocols in prison, her insistence on imperial prerogatives despite obvious powerlessness, and her persistent belief that loyal forces will restore Romanov authority through divine intervention. Historians still argue whether Alexandra's influence over Nicholas II was sufficient to make her responsible for the policies that led to imperial collapse. Evidence suggests that while she reinforced his autocratic tendencies and supported disastrous ministerial appointments, the fundamental problems facing Russia in 1917 transcended individual responsibility. You notice how Alexandra's mystical Christianity, while providing personal comfort during crisis, creates a political worldview fundamentally incompatible with modern governance. Her belief that earthly authority derives from divine appointment makes compromise and constitutional limitation appear not just politically unwise, but spiritually heretical. The final months of Alexandra's life reveal a woman whose spiritual convictions remain unshaken despite overwhelming evidence of their political consequences. You witness her continued prayers for imperial restoration, her maintenance of religious observances in captivity, and her apparent acceptance of martyrdom as a divinely ordained conclusion to her earthly mission. Alexander's execution in July 1918 eliminates not just a person, but a symbol of mystical monarchy's complete incompatibility with modern political realities. Yet you observe how her death also creates a martyrdom narrative that will influence Russian political culture long after the Romanov dynasty's disappearance. The destruction of Alexander's correspondence and personal effects represents attempts to erase evidence of how mystical politics had corrupted imperial governance, but surviving documents reveal the extent to which supernatural considerations had displaced rational policy analysis during Russia's final crisis under autocratic rule. You realize that Alexandra Feodorovna represents the queen consort as mystical politician, someone whose genuine religious devotion and maternal desperation combine to create a political philosophy based on divine intervention rather than human agency. Her story demonstrates how personal crisis can drive individuals toward supernatural solutions that, however comforting personally, prove catastrophic when applied to governmental policy. Her tragedy lies not in malicious intent, but in the dangerous gap between spiritual conviction and political reality. You step through the corridors of Buckingham Palace in the modern era, where television cameras replace court painters and opinion polls have become more important than royal bloodlines, discovering how 20th century queens consort adapted their behind-the-scenes influence to constitutional democracy's transparent demands. The scent of fresh flowers mingles with printers' ink from newspapers that scrutinize every royal gesture, as you observe women who must exercise power while appearing to have none at all. The transformation begins with Queen Mary, whose Victorian upbringing meets 20th century publicity demands in ways that reshape the monarchy's relationship with democratic society. You witness her careful cultivation of public dignity during World War I, recognizing that royal survival depends not on divine right, but on popular approval. Her visits to munitions factories and wounded soldiers represent more than charitable duty. They're calculated demonstrations of royal relevance during democracy's greatest crisis. You observe how Queen Mary's influence over George V operates through what historians call soft power, the ability to shape decisions through personal relationships and moral authority rather than formal command. Her correspondence reveals a sophisticated understanding of how constitutional monarchy must balance traditional pageantry with modern accessibility, creating a royal image that satisfies both conservative supporters and democratic critics. The abdication crisis of 1936 showcases how Queen's consort must navigate between personal loyalty and institutional survival, as you witness Queen Mary's agonizing position during Edward VIII's determination to marry Wallis Simpson. Her private letters reveal the conflict between maternal instinct to support her son and political wisdom that recognizes the monarchy's vulnerability to scandal during periods of international tension. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, emerges as perhaps the most politically astute royal consort of the modern era, as you observe her transformation from shy duchess into the steel-spine symbol of British resistance during World War II. The Blitz provides her with opportunities to demonstrate royal courage while building the personal popularity that will sustain the monarchy through decades of social transformation. You discover that the Queen Mother's influence during her husband's reign extends far beyond ceremonial functions into active participation in governmental decision-making. Her presence at weekly audiences with prime ministers, her correspondence with political leaders, and her behind-the-scenes interventions in sensitive policy matters demonstrate how constitutional monarchy can accommodate informal female political participation. The challenge of maintaining royal influence within democratic frameworks requires increasingly sophisticated public relations management, as you observe how mid-century queens consort master the art of appearing apolitical while actually advancing specific policy agendas. Their charitable patronages, their ceremonial appearances, and their carefully scripted public statements serve political purposes disguised as traditional female activities. Queen Elizabeth II's accession transforms the dynamics of royal marriage, as you witness Prince Philip's adaptation to the unprecedented role of consort to a reigning queen. His experience reveals the gender assumptions embedded in traditional monarchy as he struggles to maintain masculine dignity while officially subordinated to his wife's constitutional authority. Their partnership demonstrates how changing social attitudes toward gender roles affect even the most traditional institutions. You notice how television transforms the possibilities and limitations of royal influence, as cameras bring Queen's consort into subjects' homes, while simultaneously constraining their ability to engage in private political maneuvering. The medium that makes them more visible also makes them more vulnerable to criticism, requiring new forms of discretion and diplomatic skill. The evolution of royal marriages during the later 20th century reflects broader changes in women's social roles, as you observe how Princess Margaret, Princess Anne, and later Diana, Princess of Wales, navigate between traditional royal duties and modern expectations of female independence. Their struggles reveal the tensions between institutional requirements and personal autonomy that characterize women's experiences across society. Diana's transformation from shy kindergarten teacher into global humanitarian demonstrates how modern queens consort can transcend national boundaries to exercise international influence. You witness her evolution from decorative royal wife into independent political actor whose campaigns against landmines and AIDS stigma demonstrate soft power's potential for addressing global challenges. The media attention surrounding Diana's marriage and divorce reveals both the opportunities and dangers facing modern royal women. As you observe how celebrity culture transforms queens consort into entertainment figures whose personal lives become public property. Her story demonstrates how traditional royal privacy becomes impossible in the age of tabloid journalism and global communication. You discover that contemporary queens consort must balance multiple and sometimes contradictory expectations, remaining politically neutral while supporting important causes, maintaining dignity while being accessible, preserving tradition while adapting to social change. Their success requires diplomatic skills that often exceed those demanded of elected politicians. The role of Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, demonstrates how modern royal consorts must overcome negative publicity through patient demonstration of competence and commitment. You observe her gradual transformation from controversial figure into respected working royal through strategic charity work, careful public appearances, and consistent support for her husband's initiatives. Modern queens consort operate within constitutional frameworks that officially limit their political role while providing numerous opportunities for informal influence. You witness how they use patronage of charitable organizations, participation in state ceremonies, and cultivation of relationships with political leaders to advance policy agendas that serve both royal interests and broader public welfare. The international dimensions of modern royal influence become apparent through state visits, diplomatic receptions, and cultural exchanges that strengthen bilateral relationships while advancing specific political and economic objectives. Queens consort serve as unofficial ambassadors whose personal charm and cultural knowledge can facilitate negotiations that formal diplomacy finds difficult to achieve. Historians still argue whether modern queens consort possess real political influence or merely provide decorative legitimacy for democratic governments that have outgrown monarchical authority. Evidence suggests that their influence varies dramatically based on individual personality, political circumstances, and their ability to adapt traditional roles to contemporary requirements. You observe how social media creates new opportunities and challenges for royal women, as platforms like Instagram and Twitter allow direct communication with subjects while also exposing them to immediate criticism and constant scrutiny. The democratic potential of social media conflicts with traditional royal mystique in ways that require careful management. The emphasis on environmental protection, mental health awareness, and international development that characterizes contemporary royal charitable work reflects both genuine personal commitment and shrewd recognition of issues that transcend partisan political divisions while addressing urgent social needs. You notice how modern queens consort must demonstrate their value to taxpayers who fund royal activities, requiring them to justify their positions through measurable achievements and visible public service, rather than simply existing as symbols of national unity and historical continuity. The education and professional backgrounds of recent royal consorts, from commoners' daughters to international humanitarian workers, reflect changing social expectations about meritocracy and female achievement, while also demonstrating the monarchy's adaptation to democratic values. You realize that modern queens consort represent the ultimate evolution of hidden female power, as they exercise influence through soft power, moral authority, and strategic public service, while operating within constitutional frameworks that officially deny them a political role. Their story demonstrates how traditional institutions can adapt to democratic societies while preserving essential functions that elected governments cannot easily provide. Their influence may be less dramatic than their historical predecessors, but it remains significant in shaping public discourse, international relationships, and social policy within the constraints and opportunities of contemporary democratic governance. You drift through the twilight corridors of history, where the echoes of whispered commands and silent strategies still linger in the air like incense from long extinguished candles. The shadows of these remarkable women stretch across centuries, their influence rippling through time in ways that shape the very foundations of the world you inhabit today. As darkness settles over the palaces and courts where they once moved like phantoms of power, you begin to understand the profound legacy of those who ruled from behind veils, screens, and thrones that bore other names. The patterns emerge as you trace their stories across cultures and centuries, revealing universal truths about power, influence, and the human capacity to transcend official limitations through intelligence, patience, and strategic thinking. Whether in the marble halls of Byzantium or the silk-draped chambers of the Forbidden City, whether in medieval castles or modern constitutional palaces, these women discovered that true authority often flows through channels that official histories rarely record. You witness how each generation of queens consort inherited the accumulated wisdom of their predecessors while adapting to new challenges and opportunities. Eleanor of Aquitaine's diplomatic networks evolved into Catherine de Medici's correspondence, which transformed into Marie de Medici's international alliances, which eventually became the soft power diplomacy of modern royal women. The tools changed, but the fundamental understanding remained constant. Influence requires relationships, patience, and the ability to see possibilities where others see only limitations. The cost of such power becomes apparent as you consider the personal sacrifices these women made in service of their political ambitions, the loneliness of maintaining facades while keeping true thoughts hidden, the constant vigilance required to navigate courts where a single misstep could mean death or exile, the anguish of choosing between maternal instincts and political necessity. These burdens shape their characters and constrain their choices in ways that make their achievements all the more remarkable. You observe how their religious faith, whether genuine devotion or political calculation, provided both motivation and justification for their activities. The divine sanction that legitimized their queenship also offered protection for actions that might otherwise appear presumptuous or dangerous. Their piety became armor against criticism, while their charitable works created networks of obligation and gratitude that served political purposes long after the immediate beneficiaries were forgotten. The international dimensions of their influence reveal how marriage, kinship, and personal relationships created the first truly global political networks. Long before modern communications technology, these women maintained awareness of developments across continents through family connections, religious orders, and commercial relationships that transcended national boundaries. Their correspondence networks served as early warning systems for political crises and opportunities that official diplomacy often failed to anticipate. You remember how Theodora's transformation from actress to empress demonstrated that social mobility remained possible even in rigidly hierarchical societies for those clever enough to recognize and seize their opportunities. Her story echoes through the centuries in the rise of other remarkable women who refused to accept the limitations imposed by birth, circumstance, or gender expectations. The tragedy of figures like Alexandra Feodorovna reminds you that intelligence and dedication cannot always overcome historical forces beyond individual control. Yet, even their failures provide lessons about the dangers of substituting wishful thinking for realistic analysis. Their mistakes illuminate the boundaries of personal agency, while their successes demonstrate its remarkable potential when properly directed. You notice how the evolution of Queen's consort reflects broader changes in society's understanding of gender, authority, and political legitimacy. The mystical monarchy that empowered medieval queens gave way to constitutional frameworks that required different strategies and skills. Yet the fundamental challenge remained constant: how to exercise meaningful influence while officially remaining subordinate to male authority. The architectural monuments they left behind, palaces, churches, hospitals, and schools, represent more than aesthetic achievements or charitable gestures. These buildings embody their vision of how power should be exercised and what purposes it should serve. The summer palace that Cixi rebuilt, the Luxembourg Palace that Marie de Medici constructed, the hospitals that modern royal women patronize, all demonstrate how queens consort used physical structures to make their influence visible and permanent. Their patronage of arts and learning created cultural legacies that often outlasted their political achievements. The troubadour culture that Eleanor of Aquitaine nurtured, the Renaissance scholarship that Isabella of Castile supported, the Enlightenment ideas that Catherine the Great promoted. These intellectual movements shaped human consciousness in ways that transcended their immediate political contexts. Historians still argue whether these women advanced or hindered the cause of female equality, whether their success within traditional systems legitimized those systems or demonstrated their potential for transformation. Perhaps both interpretations contain elements of truth, reflecting the complex reality that progress often occurs through accommodation as much as confrontation. You realize that their stories offer timeless lessons about leadership, influence, and the patient cultivation of power in circumstances that might seem hopeless to less determined individuals. Their techniques, the strategic use of information, the careful building of alliances, the transformation of apparent weaknesses into hidden strengths, remain relevant in any context where official authority and real influence operate according to different rules. The modern queen's consort, you observed, demonstrate that even in democratic societies, there remains space for the kind of informal influence that these women perfected over centuries. The constitutional frameworks that officially constrain royal political participation create new challenges that require adaptation of traditional techniques rather than their abandonment. As the shadows deepen and the last light fades from ancient windows, you sense that the legacy of these remarkable women extends far beyond the specific achievements recorded in history books. They changed fundamental assumptions about what women could accomplish, what power looked like, and how influence operated in human societies. Their whispered commands still echo in the corridors of power. Their strategic thinking continues to influence political behavior, and their example provides inspiration for anyone who must work within restrictive systems while pursuing transformative goals. The queens behind the throne proved that visibility and authority are not synonymous, that patience can be more powerful than force, and that the most lasting influence often operates through channels that leave few traces in official records. Their stories remind you that true power lies not in commanding attention, but in shaping outcomes, not in claiming credit, but in achieving results, not in breaking barriers, but in moving through them with such skill that observers never realize how completely the landscape has been transformed. In the gathering darkness of this final moment, you understand that these women's greatest achievement was not any single political victory or dynastic success, but their collective demonstration that human potential cannot be contained by social expectations, legal limitations, or cultural assumptions. They proved that extraordinary individuals can transcend extraordinary circumstances through intelligence, determination, and the courage to pursue influence through whatever channels remain available. Their legacy whispers still in every corridor of power, every boardroom, every place where important decisions are made through relationships, persuasion, and the patient accumulation of trust and obligation. The queens behind the throne created a template for hidden influence that continues to shape how power operates in human societies. Their phantom presence, a reminder that the most important rulers are often those whose names never appear on official documents, whose commands are never recorded by historians, yet whose influence shapes the destiny of nations and the course of human civilization. The candles flicker and die. The shadows claim their ancient domain. You drift towards sleep, carrying the whispered secrets of women who proved that true queens need not wear crowns to rule the world.